Most people think they understand what happened here. They don't. In fact, if you watched this and thought nothing special happened, that reaction is exactly the point. Because the real moment wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, and it definitely wasn't obvious. It happened quietly, early, and right in front of everyone. By the time the crowd realized they were watching something different, the outcome was no longer in question. And here's the problem. Once you see what actually decided this, you can't unsee it. That's why people still argue about this today. Not because it was unclear, but because it was uncomfortable to accept. Those who were there would later say it did not feel arranged. No banners announced it. No officials prepared a schedule. It unfolded the way certain confrontations always do, slowly, through proximity rather than intention. At the center of the environment stood Muhammad Ali, already accustomed to rooms bending around his presence. Wherever he traveled, attention followed, not because he demanded it, but because people had learned to look when he entered. His reputation moved faster than he did, arriving ahead of him, shaping expectations before he spoke a word. Nearby, though not seeking the same gravity, was Bruce Lee. He did not command space through volume or performance. He observed first, listened longer than most found comfortable. His authority, if it could be called that, came from a different source, one that did not require witnesses to function. The setting itself encouraged comparison, a shared training environment, a convergence of disciplines, boxing and martial arts existing side by side, each with its own language of power. People noticed the contrast immediately. Ali's confidence was public, expansive, sharpened by years of verbal sparring and visible triumphs. His mastery had been proven under lights, recorded, replayed, debated. He understood crowds. He understood pressure. He had built an identity that thrived in open challenge. Lee's presence was quieter but not passive. Those who trained near him spoke of an intensity that did not rise or fall with attention. He did not perform drills for approval. He refined movements that seemed incomplete to casual observers, too small, too restrained, too unfinished. This difference did not go unnoticed. In spaces like this, silence often invites interpretation, and interpretation, left unchecked, becomes narrative. Whispers began not as insults, but as questions. What would happen if speed met speed? If confidence met control? If reputation met something that did not care to be measured? No one remembers a formal challenge being issued. They remember the atmosphere changing. Ali, used to being the axis around which conversation revolved, sensed it. He was not threatened by it. If anything, he appeared amused. Challenges had followed him his entire career. He had learned that most of them dissolved under scrutiny. Lee, for his part, did not step forward. He did not retreat either. He remained exactly where he was, focused on his work, unaffected by the growing speculation. That stillness did more to escalate the situation than any provocation could have. Observers later said this was the moment when inevitability set in, not because either man sought confrontation, but because the environment demanded resolution. Two forms of authority cannot occupy the same space indefinitely without being compared. And comparison, once public, rarely remains theoretical. By the time the idea of a demonstration surfaced, it felt less like a decision and more like a conclusion already forming. No one yet understood how it would unfold, only that it would, and that whatever happened would not belong to the moment alone, but to the stories told afterward. Confidence, when observed long enough, invites examination. What began as quiet curiosity gradually took on a public shape. Conversations that once stayed near the edges of the room moved closer to the center. People spoke more freely now, no longer asking if something would happen, but when. The environment had shifted from shared space to shared anticipation. Ali did not ignore this change. He had spent his life understanding how attention gathers and how it feeds on momentum. Where others might have bristled, he appeared comfortable, calm, even playful. To him, a test in front of witnesses was familiar territory. Visibility was not a risk. It was an advantage. Those watching mistook this ease for certainty. They assumed that confidence, expressed openly, was the same as control. Lee remained unchanged. He did not respond to the growing audience. He did not adjust his posture or his pace. If anything, he seemed to withdraw further into precision, shorter movements, longer pauses, an economy that looked almost indifferent to being seen. This imbalance unsettled people. In public challenges, spectators expect symmetry. Two figures facing one another, each acknowledging the other's presence. Here, only one side appeared to engage with the crowd at all. The other behaved as though the crowd were incidental. That difference sharpened the tension. Someone suggested a demonstration, not as a spectacle but as clarification, a way to resolve the unspoken questions. The idea spread quickly, carried less by excitement than by relief. People wanted the ambiguity removed. They wanted the comparison settled. Ali accepted without hesitation. Witnesses recalled no bravado in the moment, only familiarity. He had answered challenges his entire career. This was simply another room, another audience. Lee did not accept in the same way. There was no verbal agreement that anyone could remember, no nod for the crowd. He acknowledged the suggestion only by standing where he already was, as if to say that nothing needed to be prepared. That unsettled even more people. Because preparation is what spectators trust. It reassures them that what they are about to see will follow recognizable rules. Here there were none. As word spread, the crowd grew, not large but dense. Fighters, trainers, observers who understood enough to know that something unusual was forming. They positioned themselves carefully, aware that whatever occurred would be subtle, easy to misinterpret if viewed from the wrong angle. The pressure now belonged to the moment itself. Ali remained relaxed, talking lightly, moving easily. He looked exactly as people expected him to look. That familiarity comforted the crowd. It gave them something solid to hold on to. Lee offered no such anchor. His silence was not defiance. It was refusal to perform, to reassure, to explain. By the time both men stood within the same space, the audience had already chosen sides without realizing it. Most expected dominance to announce itself. They expected speed to look fast, power to look forceful, authority to look unmistakable. They were prepared to witness a contest. What they were not prepared for was how little of one they would recognize. There was no clear beginning. Those closest to the space later disagreed on when it started. Some believed it began the moment both men stopped speaking. Others thought it started earlier, when the room itself seemed to quiet, as if sound had become unnecessary. No signal was given. No stance was formally taken. Ali stood as he often did, balanced, loose, alert, a posture shaped by years of reading opponents before they committed. His eyes tracked movement easily. He looked prepared but not tense. This was familiar ground. Lee's posture was harder to define. He did not square himself in a way the crowd recognized. His feet were placed simply, almost casually. His hands rested without emphasis. To many watching, it looked unfinished, like someone waiting for instructions that never came. Then something changed, not visibly, not dramatically. Those paying close attention noticed a shift in distance, not a step exactly. More like the space between them had been measured and quietly adjusted. Lee did not advance in a way that registered as movement. He simply occupied a range that had not existed a moment earlier. Ali reacted, not with a strike, but with awareness. His weight shifted, his shoulders aligned. He was reading something that the crowd could not see. What followed was brief enough that some missed it entirely. There was no flurry, no exchange, no sound that marked impact. Lee's motion, if it could be called that, was contained within inches. A slight rotation, a redirection rather than an entry. It was not forceful. It was precise. Ali did not retreat. He did not advance either. Instead, he paused. That pause carried more weight than any blow could have. It was the pause of someone reassessing assumptions in real time. His expression changed, not to surprise, but to calculation. The room felt it immediately. Lee remained still. He had not pressed forward. He had not followed up. Whatever had just been demonstrated, it ended the moment it was complete. There was no attempt to capitalize on it, no desire to extend it for clarity. The crowd waited for continuation. None came. Ali shifted again, slower now. The ease that had defined his movement earlier gave way to something more deliberate. He was no longer engaging with the idea of a challenge. He was engaging with uncertainty. Lee did not fill that uncertainty. He let it expand. Observers later said this was the most unsettling part, not what happened, but what did not. No escalation, no explanation, just the quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental had been revealed, and that pressing further would only misunderstand it. The demonstration ended the same way it began. The collapse did not arrive as a moment. There was no visible failure for the crowd to point to, no stumble, no loss of balance, no sign that would satisfy those waiting for confirmation. What unraveled did so internally, and therefore quietly. Ali remained composed. Anyone looking for embarrassment would have found none. He spoke briefly to those near him, his tone unchanged, his posture was relaxed. To an untrained eye, nothing had shifted, but those who understood fighters noticed the difference immediately. His attention had turned inward. The playful rhythm that usually governed his movement was gone. In its place was something narrower, more selective. He was no longer engaging with the room. He was replaying something only he had felt. Lee did not remain to observe the effect. He returned to his training as if nothing of consequence had occurred. No acknowledgment of the audience. No attempt to frame the moment. He did not look back to see who was watching him now. That absence of interest carried its own weight. The crowd lingered, uncertain how to interpret what they had witnessed. Some tried to describe it aloud, but their words felt inadequate. Others avoided conversation entirely, sensing that explanation would diminish the experience. What unsettled them most was not the lack of spectacle but the lack of resistance. There had been no struggle to overcome, no dominance asserted, no victory claimed, and yet something had been decided. Ali did not challenge the outcome. He did not seek clarification. Those close to him later said he asked no questions. That restraint spoke louder than any commentary could have. He understood the difference between losing a contest and encountering a boundary. The boundary had not been physical. It was conceptual. The realization that speed could be neutralized without pursuit, that power could be rendered irrelevant without confrontation. That mastery did not require expression to be effective. For a man whose career had been built on visible excellence, this was not defeat, but it was instruction. Lee offered no lesson verbally. He did not need to. The demonstration had already completed its work. Pressing it further would have turned it into performance, and performance was never the point. By the time the space emptied, the tension had not dissolved, it had settled. Those who left carried it with them, unsure why the moment felt heavier in memory than it had in real time. Years later, witnesses would struggle to explain what they had seen, but they were unanimous on one detail. No one who stood in that room walked away unchanged. The room returned to normal before the story did. Equipment was put away. Conversations resumed elsewhere. The space itself offered no evidence that anything unusual had occurred. By evening it was just another training hall, quiet, ordinary, forgettable. The moment, however, did not leave with the crowd. It traveled in fragments, in partial recollections, in pauses that appeared when someone tried to explain what they had witnessed and found language insufficient. Over time, the details blurred, but the feeling did not. Those who spoke about it years later rarely agreed on specifics. They disagreed on distance, on timing, on what exactly had been done. They agreed on one thing only. Whatever happened had not been meant for them. The incident did not become a headline. It did not circulate as proof or promotion. It survived instead in private retellings, among fighters, trainers, people who understood the difference between performance and control. Each retelling grew quieter, more restrained, as though the story itself resisted embellishment. Ali went on to do what he always did. He fought. He spoke. He stood in public spaces and commanded them with the same presence that had defined his career. To the world, nothing had changed. But those close to him noticed subtle shifts, a greater selectiveness in engagement, a sharper awareness of range, a respect for what could not be forced into display. He never spoke publicly about that day, not out of secrecy, but out of understanding. Some experiences lose their value when translated too directly. Lee continued his work with the same intensity he had always carried, teaching, refining, reducing movements further, not expanding them. To those who asked, he offered no story, no clarification. The moment had already passed, and revisiting it would have misunderstood its purpose. Years later, when both men had become something larger than themselves, the story remained, not as a contest, not as a victory, but as a reference point. A quiet example passed between those who valued restraint over recognition, a reminder that the highest level of mastery often appears incomplete to those looking for proof. That true authority does not announce itself. It reveals itself once and then withdraws. The legend endured not because of what was shown, but because of what was withheld. And in that withholding, those who understood found their lesson, not in who stood taller afterward, but in who felt no need to stand at all.